Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you here at the arena and joining, speaking to people via Zoom and the conference call. This is my first face-to-face conference in about 2 years, so it's both a real joy to be here, but just a little bit daunting as well. I'm really delighted to have the chance to tell you a little bit about our Uniting the Movement strategy. I'm really delighted to also be able to support Active Lincolnshire and their Let's Get Lincolnshire Moving work, which I know is going to be refreshed, not least because of COVID, but it's really, really important. It's really important also that I just acknowledge from the start this morning just how difficult the last 18 months has been for us. Of course it has. It's been hard for every single one of us. I want to thank you for what you've been doing to support your communities, your organisations, your people, what you've been doing to try and keep people active, because it's never really been more important. So thank you for that. Sport England has certainly tried to do their bit. We brought forward £300 million worth of investment as our COVID response through our community emergency, tackling inequalities, return to play funds, and that's got funding down to a really, really local level. I hope our campaigns join the movement which we created just days into the first lockdown, and then our more established campaigns, This Now Can, We Are Under Being Tweetable. I hope they've helped, and I'd like to think that the advice we put out to the sector has also played a little bit. Active Lincolnshire have definitely done their bit, and thank you so much for that. Not least through the Tackling Inequalities Fund. That's shared out 20 million across the Active Partnership Network. The share here in Lincolnshire was something like 248,000. That supported 59 projects, which got really down to a local level, particularly focused on those most hit by COVID, so older people, people with disabilities or a long-term health condition, people on low income. So thank you, Emma, thank you, Mark, and the entire team for what you've been doing. So let's come on and look at Uniting the Movement, Sport England's 10-year strategy to transform lives and communities through sport and physical activity. It was launched back in January this year, a strategy designed and built through thousands and thousands of conversations with stakeholders. I know some of you here today helped us build that strategy, so thank you. It's a strategy built around the belief that when we move, we are stronger. Stronger as individuals, we're stronger as a nation. And we care about movement because of the benefits it brings. The benefits it brings to our health, our society, our economy. And I trust that's an ambition you share and benefits you'd like to see put in place for everybody. But as I said a moment ago, we have to acknowledge that our task just got a whole lot harder because of the pandemic. And although restrictions have been lifted, still challenges, of course there are. I'm very much a glass half full sort of guy. And so I do believe there's lots and lots of opportunities. I don't think that it's been quite in our psyche as a nation how important it has been to exercise and what that can mean for us. That's something we can really build on. And through combining effort and working together, I believe we can realise our vision in uniting the movement. That's a nation of more equal, inclusive and connected communities, a country where people live happier, healthier and more fulfilled lives. And there's no quick fix to making that a reality, but we definitely know that getting people active is a really effective and sustainable way to do that. And that's why Sport England exists. It's why I want to work with you. It's why I want to support and work with Active Lincolnshire. So uniting the movement is underpinned and built upon our values. We developed these a couple of years ago, and you can see them on the slide around the room. I trust you will find common purpose in these. We said right from the start, there'd be an evolution of the things we do, but there'd be a massive revolution in how and the how we work as Sport England. And that was born out by a desire to change. Also an understanding that there is no single silver bullet, no single policy, no single partner or organisational programme that can make the level of change we need to get our nation active. So we need to combine effort, and we have to build partnerships. And what that means for our work at Sport England and that of our partners is, first and foremost, a national strategy, but one which is enabled locally, bottom up, informed by the people you work with and support. And also a realisation that everyone needs something, but some people need more. It's the Marmot even philosophy of universal proportionalism. And so tackling inequalities is at the heart of everything we seek to do. And we certainly want to live the principle of nothing about us without us, seeking wider and more diverse voices around the table, co-creating the solutions with people with lived experiences of the issues and the barriers we're trying to overcome. We're going to be stubborn on the vision, but I hope really brave and flexible around how we get there. And we have to be really good at the basics. So the things we're going to do, there's 3 of them, and I want to just look at them in turn, if I may. To deliver on the ambition of the strategy, we are focusing our time and resources first around advocating for movement, sport and physical activity, investing our national lottery money, our exchequer funding, the money which comes from government, is an incredible privilege and an important thing which we do. But we're much more than just a funder. We are advocates, we're campaigners, we're influencers. We're making the case for physical activity at the moment. We're talking directly to government as we go through the spending review, and it's our job to advocate for physical activity through that. And we want certainly to do more and more of that in the future. Then the second thing is joining forces around 5 big issues, and I'll say a little bit more about each of those in a moment or two. Then thirdly, we want to create the catalysts for change. To achieve our goals, we need to create the right conditions to really turbocharge progress, and that's where the catalysts come in. The big issues and the catalysts are the key things when we talk to over 2,000 different stakeholders and people. They were the things which everybody began to circle around, and we feel on things like if we tackle them, we really will make a difference. They've been ratified by data and insight, certainly informed by what we've learned through working locally through our local delivery pilots, and indeed the work which our active partnerships do. And we've done a lot of horizon scanning, at least over the last 18 months. So let's come on and just look at the big issues one by one. The slide sets them out for you, and I'm going to say something about them one by one. And these really are, and I'd like you to see them as the opportunities, the things which really will make a big difference. Our first challenge, and this is, I guess, no surprise to any of this, is recovery and reinvention. As the title suggests, it's all about the collective recovery from the pandemic, but also reinventing as a vibrant, relevant sector that provides sport and physical activity that suits everyone. And I deliberately use that term, everyone. Currently, the opportunities to get involved in sport and physical activity they depend too much on our background, our bank balance, our gender, or our postcode. And that's simply not fair. That's not right. It means loads and loads of people are missing out on the benefits they could get from an active life. And so we're working to tackle inequality and unlock the advantages of sport and physical activity for everyone. We believe that sport and physical activity can be a vehicle to help address society's biggest issues, well-being, our employability, social cohesion, certainly unlock many, many billions worth of healthcare savings. Moving on to the second one. This is around connecting communities, and it's definitely where active partnerships come in. But actually, active partnerships have a role to play across all of the big issues, all of the catalysts. It's about further focusing sport and physical activity as having a vital role in the fabric of our nation. For the incredible ability it has to bring our communities together. It doesn't always do that, does it? But it really can do. This has been a really massive area of work in our last strategy towards an active nation, not least through the 12 local delivery pilots. We've learned a lot from those. It's now time to really share those learnings. And actually the biggest learning is there's no one intervention, there's not that single bullet. But actually, it's system-wide working. It's collaboration. Collaboration has been the thing which has really made a difference in those local pilots. It's what goes to the heart of what active partnerships do. Moving on to ensuring positive experiences for children and people. We really, really are going to have a relentless focus on giving young people positive and enjoyable experiences in physical activity and building those foundations for lifelong participation. What we need to do is drive physical literacy, and what I mean by that is made up of 5 things. Building youngsters' confidence in moving, building some competence. Everybody really focuses in on that one. It is important to have some skills, but it's certainly not the biggest driver. Enjoyment, understanding why it's important to move, and the knowledge of where to move, where to get active, how to play sport. And the biggest single driver to getting youngsters, I think it's actually the same for adults, the biggest driver which gets a youngster active is enjoyment. And do you know, we have to be a bit honest, an awful lot of things we make our children do when it comes to sport, comes to physical activity, isn't enjoyable, and that's really, really got to change. Connecting with health and well-being is the fourth of the big issues. It's really, really important, and again, it's about doing more. We started this under our current strategy, so it's further strengthening the links, the connection between sport, physical activity, and health and well-being. I think this is the one where we really can build on what we've learned as a nation through the pandemic. It's about building on our work with public health. It's about campaigns like We Are Undefeatable, which focuses on people with long-term health conditions and just nudges them into activity on their terms. So it might just be a walk from here for 5 minutes. That's enough as a start and something we can build on. It's definitely about trying to build physical activity into health pathways, building on social prescribing, making that really work for physical activity. And then the fifth and final big issue is active environments. And this is our collective role in creating and protecting the places, spaces and buildings where people play sport or get active. It means protecting and improving the nation's leisure facilities. And my goodness, we were talking about this, weren't we? We were talking about this a lot over dinner yesterday. just how tough it's been for our leisure centres and our leisure trusts. We've tried to help where we can, and the job's not done there, but we've got to protect those. It's about creating opportunities around community places to be able to walk, to cycle where you live or where you work. It's definitely about opening up school sports facilities beyond the normal school day for the youngsters, but also for the community. And again, Active Lincolnshire has been doing some great work. We and the network partnerships got 10 million at very short notice and had to be spent really quickly to help schools open up their facilities. And we've got something like 1,000 schools to reopen their facilities at the weekend, in holidays, and we've just got to build on that. It's also about maximising the potential of green spaces and the opportunities to walk and cycle. I think it's also finding common purpose with climate change. When you talk to children, that's really, really important to them. One thing which is worth just flagging, none of the big issues, or for that matter, the catalysts, which I'll say something about in a moment, should be seen in isolation. They're not silos. They're all interrelated and integrated. We need to work on them holistically, both nationally and globally. Very quickly, these are the catalysts. Again, there's a nice tiny five of them. I'll read them. They're things like effective investment models, applying innovation and digital learning, community governance, the things which you learn. These are the things which will really turbocharge our strategy, both locally and nationally. It's not time to go into them in detail, but if you go onto our website, you can see a little bit more about what they are about. This strategy is quite different from any other I've been involved in at Sport England, in that it focuses on high-level themes and ambitions. It's a 10-year strategy. We've done that deliberately because we want it to be flexible. We want it to stay relevant. We want it to find purpose with whichever government we have, whichever local administrations are there. But what we are doing to bring it to life is publishing a series of implementation plans to bring the delivery to life. We published the first this April, and it looked at the current year, so April 21 to April 2022, a year of transition with work focused around 4 goals: respond, of course, to COVID, transforming ourselves, planning for the future of the strategy, and transitioning to it. The plan goal includes laying the foundations of the work through putting long-term funding in place for over 130 system partners. So the likes of Active Partnerships, national governing bodies, other organisations and charities like Mind, the Youth Sport Trust, the Activity Alliance, the organisations we know we're going to need to work with, the organisations we know share our ambitions, share our values, share our goals. And I'm really delighted to say that we are working with Active Lincolnshire at the moment to put that long-term funding in place, 5-year funding. They'll have their settlement by the end of the year, and they should definitely be quietly confident about that. We've been really clear. Active Partnerships are a cornerstone, a foundation of our strategy. I hope that will give us collectively, nationally and locally, a head start on future action. We're going to continue to consult and talk to our partners, and we'll publish a further implementation plan by the end of the year, covering the period 22 to 25. And actually the dialogue we're going to have today when we get into the panel and get into the table discussions will help inform that action plan. So, to round off from me, what does this all mean here in Lincolnshire? First, I hope you can find common purpose with the ambitions, the things we're seeking to do, the big issues, the catalysts. I hope you recognise them and can see that they're what's important. What I certainly see is huge synergy between what we're trying to do at Sport England through Uniting the Movement and what's happening here in active Lincolnshire through Let's Move Lincolnshire, which I know has got to be refreshed, but also the Fit for Future plans. When I looked at those again on the train on the way down yesterday, I just found we are united in so many ways. First, I love the vision. More people, more active, more important. If we can do that, we really will have cracked it. It won't be easy, particularly if we have that lens of tackling inequality. So reaching out to those on low incomes, Black, Asian, and other diverse communities, women, disabled people. That is going to be a challenge. But if we do that, the benefits we'll reap are massive. I definitely see that we are united in terms of championing and advocating for sport and physical activity, striving for equality, providing positive experiences, driving system change, and that's fantastic. I said, I think, towards the start of the strategy, there is no silver bullet. There's no single organisation, programme, partner who can make this happen. We're only going to deliver on those ambitions if we come together, if we combine effort. I hope I've inspired you a little bit to do that, to help us at Sport England, but also help active Lincolnshire. Thanks very much. I'm really delighted to be with you today. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Ian Fytche. I'm Chief Executive at North Stevenage Council. And it's my job to go next. So we'll see how we get on in the next few minutes. I thought I'd start with a question, if I may. And the question isn't on there, but the question is this: can we crack it this time? Can we actually inspire our communities, our people and our places to be active on the back of uniting the movement? Can we really make it happen? I guess part of the answer to that is, are we up for it in terms of the people in this room and the organisations we represent? But yeah, can we crack it? Can we actually make this happen? Mike's outlined, I think it's a fantastic strategy. I think he was doing a brilliant job in pulling it together. It articulates an inspirational vision for where we need to get to, but can we make it happen? Now, I don't know whether you know, and whether you're aficionados of The Hobbit, but this day in 1937 apparently was the day when it was first published. You all knew that, didn't you? Yeah, you've all got signed copies at home. No. Well, 1937 was also the year that the first Act of Parliament that mentioned the word recreation was passed into law. I've had to write down the title of it because I'm not really au fait with it, but it was the Physical Training and Recreation Act, sponsored by the Ministry of Education. You're less likely to have a signed copy of that at home. But the thing is that back in 1937, this act was inspired by a thought, and the thought was that the nation is not healthy enough, it's not active enough, and we need to do something about it. We need to intervene and create momentum to sort it. Now, that act was largely ineffective. Something happened in 1939, which kind of rendered it somewhat meaningless at the time. 1961, another trip down memory lane, the Wolfenden Committee report, Sport in the Community, was first debated in Parliament. Now, just to orientate yourself, it's a very long time ago. It's so long ago that Spurs won the league that year. And it was also the year that the posh Fytche United, associated with me, I'm the fan, scored 134 league goals in the season. Still a record in English football. I'm still proud of it, even though I wasn't born at the time. It is a long time ago, but that committee also talked about the health of the nation. And on the back of that, it inspired things like the formation of the sports councils, that kind of endeavour. In fact, Mike, Scott and I all owe our employment at some point to the Wolfenden report, because we'll work for one at least of the sports councils. But since then, I'm not going to go through every year since then, but since then, there's been lots of reports, haven't there? Lots of strategies, lots of initiatives. Many of them are brilliant, actually, and they deliver fantastic things. But we find ourselves 60 years on still talking about our concerns about population health and health inequalities. And, you know, that thing of can we really crack it this time and get more people more active more often? And hopefully this time we can. We can actually push through on the back of this strategy and make it happen. Now, what am I actually here to talk about? Now I've gone off piece and what. I thought I'd start by talking about challenges that we faced at North Keston District Council as a bit of a backdrop to some of the work that we've done. And those challenges are articulated on this kind of thought map, really. Some years ago, we had the typical local authority portfolio of ageing facilities, not quite as bad as that one on there, but certainly dining and investment are not really serving the model in terms of physical activity and sport. Activity levels are not markedly different from anywhere else, not great. The financial context of local government was changing quite dramatically following the financial crash of 2008-9. And of course, we, like many areas of Lincolnshire, experienced the challenges of delivering services across a very rural space. And it's fair to say that we needed some kind of central purpose and strategy, some common mission to define where we were going with leisure, sport, culture, physical activity, that kind of thing. So we addressed those things. We built a strategy to address our big challenges, and we created a portfolio of investment to drive it forward. And here's some numbers that go with that. We invested around about £7 million modernising our estate. It turned around our financial challenge by £1 million a year, hugely significant. It meant that we could transform what we were doing without cutting services. In fact, we achieved a 62% increase in throughput from that investment through our built environment. So we're very proud of that. We're very proud of the fact of having a strategy, backing it with investment and delivering something with it. But what next? Because the journey continues. And it really has to crack this question of how do we get more people more active more often in our communities? How do we build the systems that we require, the collaborative systems across our communities, the capacity in our communities, the capability of organisations and people working together to really make a step change? And how do we transform the lives of people who live in our communities for the better? How do we transform their health, their well-being? How do we build more cohesive communities? How do we address some of the inbuilt structural challenges around inequality? Those sorts of questions. So we've achieved a lot. And this strategy is, that we have before us today, that Mike has outlined, and the work we're going to be doing in Lincolnshire, I think is another step in that process. It's momentum and it's inspiration to carry on with that journey collaboratively. Now, I thought I'd give you a few examples of where that money went. It's always great to put a few pictures up there, isn't it? And that is a picture from 1910, which I'm reliably informed that no one who currently works with the council is on that picture, but you never know. It's been there since 1872, originally an outdoor Lido. In 1984, it was covered and it looked like that. It's not the most attractive building, is it? And by 2010, something needed to be done. It needed to be transformed. So it now looks a bit like that and that. And it has the look and feel of the sort of place where people want to go and swim and be active. We did a lot of collaboration with our user base, with our communities to work out what the future of sleep and leisure centres should be. We also created pieces of art in the pavement and in the building itself, which were created by the community. It's inspirational piece, really, to get people to design the building themselves in many ways. Closer to here, up in North Highcombe, we did a similar piece of transformation of Long and Care, which, as the sports centre in North Highcombe, some of you will know, has been around since about 1973. And whilst it had investment over the years, it was time to transform the experience for people using that site, to create big open spaces that people could use for all sorts of activities. And we're proud again of the impact that that's had. I have to say as well, all of these pictures feature people who work for the council today, so just proving that none of them were there in 1910. So we've invested in our strategy and we've started to make that a reality on the ground. But I talked about the activity challenge in rural communities. And if I turn that challenge into an opportunity, then we would begin to focus on the natural environment, the opportunity for cycling, for walking, for using the network of public rights of way that exist across our communities. So one of the things we've been thinking about is whether we can turn the corridor from Sleaford to the Wirral into a leisure corridor. And we're starting to attract some funding into that in partnership with others to drive that project forward. It's on the back of, any of you participated in the Spires and Steeples Challenge? Some active people in the room, surely you've done that. Yeah, even I've done part of it. 26 miles of Lincoln Cathedral to Sleaford. Long distance footpath across our district. It brings heritage to life, but it also gives people the chance to be active. We want to do a lot more of that, and we're engaged in trying to unlock this project to ensure that we can create sort of corridors to the countryside that get people active. So, if you've got ideas on that score, put them on postcards, electronic postcard, and send them to me. Now, over the coming months, through Active Lincolnshire and a broad partnership connected to the health and wellbeing strategy of Lincolnshire, we'll be looking again at Let's Move Lincolnshire with its themes around active society, active place, active people, active systems. I think it's an excellent framework. There's a real opportunity to engage in that process and to help shape it for the future and to make it what you want it to be for your context, your area, your people, your communities, your organisations. I think it's a great opportunity to take the national strategy into local context and make it live in our communities and ensure that we can indeed crack it this time. But we know, don't we, that we can contribute beyond sport and physical activity. We can make a difference on a whole series of other agendas. We know that we can make our contribution to fixing the climate crisis. Now, I call it a crisis. I hope you agree. It definitely is an emergency that needs to be addressed. It's one that every council in the country, every community, all local actors are probably focused on. Did you see the report last week suggesting that there's a 40% chance that 1 year out of the next 4 will reach the Paris aspiration to keep the temperature below 1.5 C over pre-industrial levels? Now that should be a call to action if nothing else is. In the next 4 years, the Paris Agreement may be reached, 40% chance. Now, in North Stephen, we've done quite a lot on climate. We've cut our carbon emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions by 69% over the last decade. But we need to lead and inspire our communities to do the same. But I'm not saying that we in this room can fix it by getting people active, but we can sure help. If we get people more active using active modes of transport, if we transform our workplaces into more active places, then we can begin to make a difference on each of our personal carbon budgets, as it were. We can play a role in fixing the biggest crisis of our time. Now, you've probably all got carbon reduction plans in your organisations. You've probably all got strategies. We need to crack those as well, don't we? We need to find ways to ensure that we join up the policy map health and well-being and sustainability are not really separate things. They're part of the same thing. And we can join up that approach within the broader system. Now, as I draw to a conclusion, I just focus on a broader thing. I talked about the nature of our area being rural and the challenge of delivering services across 100 disparate communities and 356 square miles of central Lincolnshire. Now, what that introduces for us is, I focus quite a bit on the built environment, is the opportunity to take activity out into our communities and to make sure not just that we join up our communities through public rights of way, but we take our programs, our activities into the places where people live, where they work, and where they connect. So look out for opportunities to help us refresh our strategy, and Stephen as well, if you're involved in our patch. So we'll be doing that alongside the work that the Let's Move Lincolnshire team will be driving forward. Now, unfortunately, I had planned to stay for the Q&A, but I can't, unfortunately. The irony of that is I'm dashing off to speak at an event for Sport England and somewhere else online on leadership development later. So you can blame Mike if you like. But just to wrap up, I don't know what you think about the question of whether we can crack it this time. I hope you agree that we've got to give it a good shot and we've got to try it to do that. I think we've got a great opportunity. That opportunity is founded in a new national strategy, which I think articulates a very clear vision of where we need to go. And it builds on the things that we all told Sport England were important in that strategy development process. We've got, I think, great leadership around Active Lincolnshire to drive the strategy forward, and an opportunity to collaborate through Let's Move Lincolnshire and the rebuilding of the health and wellbeing strategy alongside integrated care system development. And of course, we've got lessons from the COVID pandemic, which teaches, if nothing else, that it's really important to make sure our communities are healthy and active and resilient to what has been the biggest health crisis in 100 years. So thank you for listening. If you do have any questions, you can ask Mike and Scott later, and I'm sure they'll email me the difficult ones if you have any. So thank you for listening. I look forward to the debate as the journey continues in the next few months.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to thank our first speakers, Mike and Ian, who have done a fantastic job there of, I think, painting a picture of what's going on nationally, that really exciting Uniting the Movement strategy that we can all get behind, and then hearing from a much more local level and Ian's experience as a leader of a local authority and how he's making things happen in his patch. So hopefully that's given you some great context, and I'm really excited now to introduce Scott. So at this point, the session takes quite a deep dive into some of the research and insights, and everything we're doing at Active Lincolnshire at the moment is led by understanding what's happening on the ground. It's led by research and insight. We've got a significant opportunity to work a lot more closely with our partners to get to better understand the research, but Scott's going to just start to share with us today some of the work that he's been doing recently for us. So I'm delighted to introduce Scott from Freshway. Thank you.
I think that's the first time ever the data person has got a clap at the beginning. Good morning. You have got, well, let's start with an apology. I was told when I was learning how to speak in public that you should never start with an apology. But I'm going to start with one today, because for you that are in the room with us today, which is fantastic, I'm afraid there's no mute button. So you've got to look like you're listening for the next 20 minutes or so. Those of you that are online, you're the lucky ones. You can turn the data geek off. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to run through mainly some adult physical activity behaviour data. But I've been asked by Emma and Naz to just give you a little flavour of some work that we've done previously around children and young people You can find the slide decks, you can find apparently a link to me presenting it on Zoom, online on the Active Lincolnshire website if you want to have a look at it, if it's a children and young people behaviour that you're really interested in. Let's just start getting into this. So, first quiz question. How much physical activity a day should children and young people aged between 5 and 18 do? It's on the slide if you look closely. 60 minutes, well done. So children and young people need to do an hour a day to benefit their healthy development. If they're doing less than half an hour a day, they're less active. That's the proportion in red on this slide. If they're achieving the 60 minutes a day, they're active, and that's the green proportion on the slide. And what you can see over the last 3 years, the third year of data does include some of the pandemic period, the first kind of few months of the pandemic period. And you can see we've had a slight increase in the proportion of children and young people that are doing less than half an hour a day. Okay, but it's not huge. It's roughly in line with what's happening in England. The sample, because as you can imagine, the world stopped for a few months, didn't it? The sample actually is still robust in Lincolnshire. That's why I put it up there. We actually ended up with a bigger sample in the third year, which was well done to Active Lincolnshire on working with the schools to get a robust sample. That's great. But we have seen this slight increase when it comes to children and young people being less active, doing less than half an hour a day. Just to put that into perspective, because it's has already been touched on by Mike and Ian, that this isn't equal across. It's not fairly distributed who's inactive across our population. So there are certain groups of children and young people that experience lower levels of activity. And as you can see, we put some of those groups on there. Those children and young people from families with low family affluence, that had kind of tied with low socioeconomic status, much more likely to be less active. Also, children and young people from our Asian and other ethnicities, horrible term that, isn't it? But fortunately, that's the way that it's asked in the survey, so I can't tell you exactly the ethnicities that those parts of our community come from. And they're also likely to be less active. And girls, it's Ian touched on this, Wolfenden Gap, 1961, whenever it was, I was quite frightened when I heard that date. I started to highlight some of the inequalities that we already had. Teenage girls was one of those groups that was already experiencing lower levels of being active. It's still there in Lincolnshire. It's still a challenge. We've still got to keep finding ways of how we create change amongst that part of our population. So as you'll see in some of the data when we get into adult, in Lincolnshire, that habit continues through into adult life as well. So we've got some interesting challenges to be thinking about when it comes to children and young people. I'm going to get into the adult bit. This is quite a few slides now. It's going to be a lovely whistle-stop tour of you all. There is a lot of information here, but there's even more if you really want to dig into this. Navaz has got a long slide deck with everything in here, so you can see how we've got to some of our conclusions and assumptions from the information that we've been looking at. Okay, I've got to start by talking a little bit about your population side, your demographics of Lincolnshire, because what we do in this analysis is we compare you to England, but comparing you to England is a bit unfair, because demographically, Lincolnshire doesn't look like England. So for example, you've got a larger proportion of people over the age of 50 in your population compared to what England has. You've got more people from lower socioeconomic groups, NS 6 to 8, if you want to get technical. These are people that are in routine, semi-routine jobs or unemployed, so that lower socioeconomic group. You've got a greater proportion of people in lower socioeconomic groups. You've also got a greater proportion of people with a limited illness and disability. All of those groups are more likely to be inactive. So straight away, when you compare yourselves to England, you're comparing apples and pears. They don't compare very well. But England is still a useful marker for us to think about. And as part of the data pack, you can see how we've compared Lincolnshire to some other areas of the country that are more statistically relevant to and look more demographically like Lincolnshire. You really want to get into the detail like that. And there's a couple of other really important bits I want to mention here. And it's about the proportion of people over the age of 55. Every year, on average, over the last 5 years, Lincolnshire has imported 2,000 people from outside of Lincolnshire into the county. Get your head around that. Not only do you have an aging population because of the baby boomer generation getting older, but also moving in. So your proportion of older people is expanding really quite rapidly. And the over 65 age group is projected to grow by 38% over the next 20 years. We're growing old people. Okay? Keep that in mind when you look at some of the data. It's really quite important. Okay, whole population, this is every adult over the age of 16, this survey reaches out to. The proportion in red, that's the inactive group, around 3 in 10. Inactive for adults, how many minutes should an adult do in a week? 150 minutes of physical activity, moderate intensity. What on earth does that mean? It means your heart rate goes up. You get a little bit out of breath. Okay, this is important as an adult because you've got to look after your ticker. Okay, we've got to get that heart rate up. And so it's part of the recommendation that we've got to increase people's heart rate. And that's how it's measured as part of what we're doing. I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail shortly. So the proportion of people that are active, 58% in the latest year. Remember, this data comes up to November last year, so it includes about 6 months of the pandemic, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail shortly. So the proportion of people that are doing 150 minutes is around 58% of the population. We've got 3 in 10 that are inactive. What does that mean for adults? Well, it means they're doing less than 30 minutes a week. That's not a lot. It doesn't feel like a lot. So we've got this quite big group that are really not doing very much. I'll break that down shortly. What's the trend? This is the good news. This is where Lincolnshire have bumped the national trend quite significantly in a way, because your proportion of inactive people this year compared to the previous year hasn't really changed. Whereas nationally, it's risen by around 2.5 percentage points. So it's one of the few areas that we do quite a bit of this kind of data analysis stuff. It's one of the few areas that have actually not gone backwards in terms of the proportion of inactive people in our population during the pandemic period. But that hides something. Sorry about that. That hides quite a bit of inequality and some differences between different population groups, which I'll come on to shortly. What does it look like across the different local authority areas? That gives you the latest data. And you can see we've got this range between about 27 percentage points and 35 percentage points when it comes to the proportion of inactive people in our population. But don't just look at the proportions. There's some quite interesting differences, because you've got to put population size onto this data to be able to think about how big the groups are. So, for example, East Lindsey, that proportion of inactive people equates to 40,000, roughly 40,000 inactive people. Whereas Boston, a higher rate of proportion of inactive people, that only equates, I say, still 20,000 people. Okay, but we've got to look behind the proportions and think about the populations of those local areas and think about, well, what does that mean when you start to turn it into real people? Again, there's lots of information in the pack for you to be able to unpick that. These are the trends. 5 years of data we've got now of this. It's like getting really good. 170,000 people across the country that fill in this form every year for us to be able to take this information from. We're starting to get a lot of information to play with. So we can start to think about the trends that we're seeing. You can look at your own local area where you live and think about what's going on there. One for me to observe on here is Lincoln. It was on a slight upward trend anyway. The pandemic has really pushed that trend upwards. Okay, so what is it that's going on there? How do we start to understand that a little bit more? We need to be just conscious of that. Some of the areas have seen a decrease. It's probably to do with the kinds of demographic groups that make up their population locally. I touched on this to begin with. Inactive people, it's not all sedentary. So it's not everybody doing nothing, okay? There's a proportion in here, the grey bit, which is called light only. So this is around 66,000 people in Lincolnshire, and all they're missing is the intensity of their exercise. What does that mean? Well, they're walking too slowly, basically. So their heart rate doesn't go up. So when they get asked the question, did your heart rate go up? They go, no. So cattle prods is my answer to that. If Ian was asking crack it, I'm saying buy cattle prods and go out there and get all the dog walkers. Might be a little bit extreme, that might not work, but it's a suggestion. I'll let you talk about that later. Okay, but it's easy to think that everybody's sedentary. They're not. However, the proportion of people that are sedentary has grown. And that is the impact of the pandemic on certain groups, which I'll come to next. So think about this inactive group. It's not just people sat on their sofas. It's people that might be out actually walking the dog for an hour every day, but because the dog's always stopping and they're walking slowly, they in their head think they're active. It's a different kind of messaging. It's a different kind of way of thinking about how do we reach these people? How do we get this message across? Because people might already perceive, I'm actually not really active. I'm busy, I'm on my feet, I'm doing things all the time, I'm going here, there, but I'm not doing it quick enough. And that intensity is really important. Okay, just getting into some of the different groups that are the challenge to crack in Ian's, using Ian's language. There's a few things on here that I'll just explain. I've already touched on NSSEC. It's the way that census classifies people into socioeconomic status. I'm also going to be touching on people with a limited illness or disability as well. And again, that's just a way of identifying those people that identify themselves when they've got an illness or a disability or a condition that limits their day-to-day activities. The others, I think, are relatively straightforward. This is inactive proportions. The grey tower is last year, 1819. The red tower is the latest year of data that we've got, 1920. And you can see there's a difference between the grey and the red towers, where the proportion of inactivity has grown amongst that group or got smaller. I'm going to make a couple of observations. Firstly, look at those aged 35 to 54. Inactivity has gone down. This is one of the group. This is the group that's potentially made the trend, the overall trend, flat. Quite a big part of your population. It's gone down quite a few percentage points, and it counterbalancing increases in some of those other groups that you can see on the slide. What I'd like to just observe to you are those four groups on the left-hand side. Okay, over 75, limiting illness, lower socioeconomic groups, and age 55 to 74. Just keep in mind the challenge that I've just said around changing population for those over the age of 50. And look at how high some of those towers are, and they're getting higher. And the pandemic has definitely hit amongst that part of our population. Of course it has. Shielding, staying at home, the communication that's rightly come out from government around the challenges and the dangers of the pandemic and affecting people's behaviour. We've got some challenges here, especially with those with a limited illness and conditions and confidence and the ability to get out the doors and be active. And I say get out the doors because for a lot of people, it is getting outdoors. And I'll come to that a little bit later. I keep saying that a lot, don't I? It's like I've got a magic bag of tricks. What's going on with some of these groups? Well, these are the trends over 5 years. I just want to highlight something here because one of the things that has driven the slight upward trend, the upward trend amongst females, amongst women within our community is the main reason why the over 75s, the 55 to 74s, and those with a limited illness and condition have gone up. It's more of a challenge with women within those groups and activity levels in that space that we're observing in the data. So what is it that we can start to think about and do about that? I think one of the big things for me that's really come out of this data is limited illness and conditions, because there's a strong correlation between people over the age of 55 and getting a condition. And we know as soon as people start to experience some kind of health condition, inactivity doubles. It has that much of an impact on people's lives. Okay, so it's in that space that we really do need to start thinking about the change that we can create. Just to kind of give you getting a bit geeky here now, but just to kind of give you a little bit of a sense of when these conditions kick in and how, you know, how prevalent are they within our population. Well, what you've got here on the left-hand side is the red dot represents the average age of people in Lincolnshire that have completed this survey, around 3,500 every year. That's the average age of people that are reporting one of those conditions. Now, those 5 conditions at the bottom have all got a strong relationship, association with physical activity. Physical activity either can prevent some of those conditions that are within those groups, or it can help manage them. So there's a real correlation here around how physical activity can help health and well-being. And you've got the average ages, and funnily enough, all of those average ages pretty much fall in that 55 to 74 age group, where we start to see inactivity levels jump up within the Lincolnshire population. So what is it that we can do in this space? And interestingly, the slide on the right gives you a sense of the proportion of people in Lincolnshire that have got those conditions. What's of interest here is how much higher they are than England for some of those conditions. And I think that will relate back to the fact that retired people getting on a bit, see this part of the world as a lovely place to come and retire and settle down in later years. And then they delve the conditions, or they bring the conditions with them. So we've got a real kind of challenge to crack in this group. We really need to start to understand, because there are some really striking differences amongst those groups, with that older age group within the Lincolnshire population. I'll come back to that later. This is my favourite slide that's going on now. This is, I love pie. By the way, it's got to be pastry all around, otherwise it's a casserole with a hat on. Okay, I love pie, so I love pie charts. That's my simple northern logic. Okay, this is a wonderful. I don't do this, by the way. We've got a Martin who's about 6'7" and does wonderful things with data. What he's done with this is he's taken all the minutes that everybody's done in England and he's grouped them into different types of activities. So where do people get their minutes from? And then he's done the same for all the minutes in Lincolnshire. And what I love about this slide is it fits so wonderfully with what Mike and Ian have just been talking about. It's not just about our leisure centres. It's not just about our sports pitches. It's not just about those that offer that we can create. It's about everyday life, because the majority of people get the majority of their minutes from walking. If we really don't crack the way that we design our communities, the way that we connect our communities, the way that we use our footpaths, our cycle paths, we are struggling. And that's just the same for the groups where inactivity is the highest. Put yourself in the shoes of being inactive. Okay? What's your first steps going to be likely to be? What's the first kind of activities you're more likely to do? You're more likely to go out and do a bit of walking. You're more likely to go and maybe do a bit more in the garden. Okay, we're in that space. Just look how important gardening is in Lincolnshire. It's huge in comparison to England. So we can't ignore it. Allotments, critical. Encouraging people to get outside. I can pick from this data, I can turn around and say roughly 80% of all minutes are done outside. 20% are done inside. We have to think about the mix of our environment and how we utilize them if you want to crack it. My final slide. Oh, it's not actually, but one last thing that I promised, and I haven't done it yet. This is a summary of what I've gone through. You've got these headlines. We've seen this increase amongst sedentary. We've got a greater proportion of people that are sedentary, which is a challenge. They're more likely to be people that are older and people with a limited illness and condition. We've got Lincoln and a couple of other local authorities where COVID appears to have had an impact, but that's counterbalanced by some of the other local authority areas where it's had less of an impact. That'll be related to the kind of demographics and topology of those areas. We've seen, when you compare Lincolnshire to all of the other active partnerships in the country, it compares really favourably to those without a limiting illness and condition. It's halfway up the table. When you look at those with a limiting illness and condition, it's near the bottom. So it's in that space that we're proposing let's think about how we crack that particular area of our work. It's very important. And we've got this growing aging population that become more associated with conditions that create inactivity, those health conditions that create inactivity. They're also in this data, this low socioeconomic status, females, we can't hide away from some of the challenges that we've got there. And there's a strong link there with the children and young people data. You can see that pattern starting in teenage years for young women starting to become inactive, and then it continues through life that we need to be conscious of. This is where I would fail at technology, but I want to just show you something that we're working on with Emma and the team, and it's just a bit of mapping. I love a bit of mapping in Press Red. We've done something similar for this for the children and young people narrative and story, where we pulled together a range of different information sources to help find where the children and young people from Asian and other ethnicities, for example, from lower socioeconomic status, where they are in the county, so we can think about targeting our resources a little bit more. And we're working on a similar tool from an adult perspective. What we're trying to pull into here is data around that over 50s, over 55 age group, limiting illness and conditions, lower socioeconomic status. If you've got in some of the in the children and young people tool, we put some local data on that NAVA's got from the coaching agencies, and we put the TIF investments on and facilities and schools and et cetera. Well, we can possibly do some of that with this. So if you can help us build a richer picture of our over 50s population and the activities that they might be going through, and help to try and bring this to life to help inform decision making, and we'd like a conversation with you. We'd like to know what we can put onto it. Just to turn a couple of layers on it, it's very easy. We'll share the link, and you can feed back to us on a different day. What's on at the moment is the proportion of people from low socioeconomic group that are aged 50 to 64. This is an important group. This group is very likely to be inactive, and we can use this data. We can get it. In 12 months' time, it's going to be like Press Red's Christmas of all Christmas, new census data. At the moment, we're using census data from 10 years ago, but in a year's time, oh my word, you won't see us for probably about 6 months, because we're just going to be playing in data. This is a little bit out of date. Some of the layers, because they're based on the 2011 census, but it's still helpful. These communities won't have changed enormously. It'll be small changes that will have occurred, and we'll be able to update that when we get the data. I just want to turn that off and turn the adult inactivity on. This is a little bit out of date, because Sporting London, they do these estimates. They do them down to middle super output area of 1 and 5. It's a way of organising census data. It's an area of Lincolnshire that's got roughly 5,000 to 15,000 people in it, between that, in that space. And we can Sporting London publish this modelled information down to middle super output area. The darker the red, the higher the levels of inactivity. And if I just click on that key, you'll start to see that some of those communities, we're up to 33, 34, and that's on last year's data. It might be a little bit different on this year's data. When you start to add that's for the whole adult population in that particular area. If you start to look at areas that have got more people over the age of 50 and are living with a long-term condition, which I think is on here somewhere, that one. If your areas have got more people over that age, and that activity level, some of those groups are going to be considerably higher. So we can use this data to try and just think about how we reach communities and people, and have conversations about what it is that we can do to crack it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. Absolutely fascinating, isn't it? And yeah, it's brilliant that Scott gets so excited about data, but he has a brilliant way of kind of making it all make sense for us. And honestly, these digital maps are absolutely fascinating. So please do have a look at the Active Lincolnshire website. You can have a play around and then dig about and find information that's relevant to yourselves. Let me just go back to the PowerPoint. And you might be pleased to know that I'm the last presenter for this morning's session. So nearly done with the PowerPoint slides. And I'm just going to talk to you today about the work that we're doing in Active Lincolnshire. I joined the organisation in May last year. So we've been on quite a journey in that time, not least, of course, because we were in the early days of the pandemic then. And of course, as we heard, the Uniting the Movement strategy had recently launched. I'm going to touch on what does a whole system approach mean to tackling the challenge of physical activity in the county. I'll pick up on some of the conversations that we've already heard around Let's Move Lincolnshire and where that county-wide movement is heading. And then it's over to you for the conversation piece around how do we turn all of this talk and all of this vision into action and get some early thoughts from you around that. So where are we now? This is kind of in no particular order, really. I just wanted to give you a flavour of where we have been over the last 18 months. Mike alluded in his presentation to the Fit for the Future business plan. And that was a piece of work that we thought was really important to do for Active Lincolnshire to really understand who we are as an organisation, what our role is and what our priorities are. Within that piece of work, we have, of course, spent time understanding the insight and the data and really getting to the bottom of what the need is in Lincolnshire. We've had to understand, inevitably, the impact of COVID, as we all have across our sectors. We've had to commit to working together because, again, as we've heard many times today, we can't do this on our own. This is no one organisation's role. There's no one bullet that's going to solve this problem. We're absolutely here today to show our commitment in working together with you. We've kind of checked in with the Let's Move Lincolnshire blueprint and that partnership, which was established in 2018 and has made some great progress. We're advocating a whole system approach to physical activity. We're listening and learning and really wanting to understand how we can work together to make a positive difference. We've also had to kind of think about how we're finding the balance. As a relatively small team and a charity that are predominantly funded by Sport England, we're kind of working out actually how can we really use that investment to make a tangible difference. And we've had to think about, okay, how do we move away perhaps from delivering programmes on the ground that actually organisations like the Football Foundation, Active Arena here, many of you in the room are very much best placed to do that activity and that delivery, to be more of a strategic, play more of a strategic leadership role in driving change. We want to move away where we can, although it's not always possible, from shorter term transactional agreements where it might just be giving somebody some money and then we walk away and we walk on to the next project, and really turning that into some transformational partnerships and creating transformational change through maintaining and co-creating things with people. We absolutely need to move towards a multi-sectoral approach. Again, we've heard in our presentations today how culture, heritage, our blue and green spaces can all make a difference to our ability to be active on a daily basis. So whilst we continue to work with the sport and physical activity sector, our role has become one that is reaching out to all sectors across the county. We don't just want to target those people who are active and engaged. They're kind of the quick wins, if you like. They're the low-hanging fruit. If you don't mind putting your trainers on and going for a run in the morning, brilliant. But actually what we really need to invest our time in is understanding how we can help those people who aren't currently active. And as we've heard from Scott in his presentation there, that's a pretty hefty chunk of our population in Lincolnshire. So that's no small challenge. But we really need to think about those people who aren't active and who aren't engaged. We need to be adaptable, we need to be flexible. We want the Let's Move Lincolnshire to have a 10-year vision that aligns with Uniting the Movement, but actually within those 10 years, we need to be able to respond quickly. We're a small, agile organisation, and we should be able to respond flexibly to need and to continue to review on a regular basis and learn. We really want to make sure that we're listening and that we're learning to what we're hearing and that we can respond to local need. I want to give you a flavour of some of the work that the team has been exceptionally busy delivering over the last 12 months. Again, you'll have heard of some of this in the presentations previously. Around children and young people, we've invested £170,000 to help schools open their facilities across Lincolnshire to community groups to enable their valued facilities to be better utilised outside of the school hours. We've revised our approach to the school games and are providing opportunities for children who not only are those children who are used to being competitive and used to turning up to competition, and actually thinking about those girls who are less active and putting on a school games programme specifically for girls. We put a school games programme on specifically for children that were struggling in that year 7 transition for a range of reasons, and who might not have ordinarily, let's face it, been on a sports pitch or taking part and enjoyed taking part in school activities. In terms of our work in health and care, this is one of the most significant areas of growth that we've seen in the last 18 months across our organisation. And that is absolutely our understanding around the impact that physical activity has on the health and well-being of our county. We've worked to develop some Think Active groups, so using physical activity to help people's mental health. We're involved in a brilliant, strong partnership collaboration programme to support pre and postnatal and to educate people working in the pre and postnatal sector about providing advice and opportunities for mums to be and new mums to be active and to stay active. We've worked with the social prescribing network to understand how social prescribing link workers and their wider contacts can provide, again, opportunities for people to be active who may be coming to the link workers with challenges of depression or money worries or all sorts of other worries, but actually sometimes a walk and talk can be the solution. Getting people outside and getting them moving can help them to unlock some of those other barriers that they're facing in their lives. We're working on a really exciting pilot programme with Active Dorset, the CCG and Lincolnshire Public Health to understand how we can embed physical activity in the healthcare system. I'm not going to pretend that every conversation I have seems to open another opportunity and sometimes bigger challenges, but actually, again, if we can start to get the healthcare system to think differently about how physical activity is prescribed, how it's talked about, and how we really focus on it as being a preventative measure to some of the challenges that then inactivity brings later in life, we've got a significant opportunity there to start making a difference. And we have funded a project with some partners that I can see in the room. Lovely to see Kath and the team from Lincoln City Foundation, where we funded a project to start looking at how we can provide people on the cancer pathway with access to physical activity. I'm not going to talk about all of these in detail, there's too much to mention, but I really just wanted to use this as an opportunity to paint a picture of the kind of work that the team is doing at the moment and the areas where we think there are opportunities for growth and where we'll continue to respond to that local need and the insight and opportunities to collaborate with partners like yourselves. In terms of the sport and physical activity sector, we continue to support our clubs through COVID. That varied at different times. It was around risk assessments, it was about health and safety, it was about reopening. And now, in fact, we know that some of our clubs and activity providers have seen a real increase in membership coming in. We want to support the sector to make sure they're providing the right products that the people in Lincolnshire can access. And again, they're not only seen to be relevant to sporty and fit people, but they are an opportunity for less active people to have a go at some of these opportunities. We continue to run the Lincolnshire Sport and Physical Activity Awards. I'm delighted to say that the 17th annual awards ceremony will be taking place this year on the 11th of November, and that's an opportunity to fly the flag for the sector and to give those elite athletes an opportunity for profile, but also importantly, again, shine the spotlight on less active people and the achievements that they have seen through being active. Work in the communities is critical, and we're all very aware of the diversity of Lincolnshire, the large spaces and the differences actually that we have in communities right across the county, the differences in access that they have to facilities. Our Tackling Inequalities Fund has reached a huge number of communities. Our work with 6 other coastal partnerships along the North East Coast has started to help us understand better the specific challenges that those coastal communities face, and actually how can we learn from and work with partners from everywhere from the Humber to Newcastle and beyond to actually really understand what can we do collectively to make a difference to some of those inequalities that we face on the coast. We've done a huge amount of work to connect with the community and voluntary sector. And again, this room is filled with people who are working on the ground directly with the populations of Lincolnshire that we want to serve. And we believe that it's through you and with you that we can create the most impact in reaching those audiences who you are already well understand. And we've made great strides in thinking about active travel, particularly walking and cycling. I've just spotted a Sustrans t-shirt to my right here, so it's brilliant to see we're working with Sustrans, Cycling UK, and a number of other local partners to think about how we can influence behaviour change, get people to walk more, to cycle more, to work, to the shops in their leisure time. And as Scott has talked about in his presentation, absolutely critical that we just have access to places for people to walk and they feel safe when they're doing so. I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive just into one of our projects, which is the Tackling Inequalities Fund. Again, it's come up a number of times today, and I have to thank the team, and particularly Ian and Naz, for their work on this project. We were delighted to receive the funding, but it was a huge amount of money, and we had to deliver activities in a pretty short time scale. Sport England really helped us define what the Tackling Inequalities Fund was all about by identifying those audience that the fund was targeted for. We then worked to connect with a range of stakeholders from across the county, community and voluntary sector organisations to really understand how we could provide funding that would help them enable the people that they were working with to be more active. People were really creative, and it was actually really exciting to see some of the projects coming through. We had a cultural trail in Spalding that involved people walking around the town, finding various different elements that they all built together, and kind of brought the town to life as well as enabled people to walk. We've got a brilliant quote here from the team of Active Nation, where somebody had been stuck in the house for months and was too afraid to come out. But actually this opportunity that Active Nation provided through the TIF funds gave them the confidence to turn up to a session, and from that point onwards then they were able to return, and they started to kind of be less nervous about leaving their homes. A really important part for us around TIF is actually that it wasn't just that short-term one-off transaction. I should add that the maximum amount of grant funding for any one project was £10,000, and a number of the projects were literally a few £100s. So this stuff always doesn't have to cost a huge amount of money. I think it's about our attitude, our approach, our ability to create and to innovate and to think about how can we get our groups to be more active as part of the work that we would be doing with them anyway. We certainly learned that collaboration and co-design really can make a difference, and actually that partnership approach, I think, was fundamental to the Tackling Inequalities Fund. We've also really seen that activity can absolutely be built into the way that we do things. We might be, if you're coming from a cultural organisation, you might be coming from a community sector organisation, you might be coming from the healthcare profession. Actually, we can all find ways to build activity into the interventions and the work that we're doing with the people that we're serving. And I think we all know that time and trust are absolutely fundamental to success. So we thank you for taking the time to build trust with us and to build trust with our partnerships to enable us to deliver some fantastic results. Somebody else here in TIF said before they started coming to the sessions, they were struggling to walk. Not anymore. It's been brilliant, and they've made new friends. And actually one of our projects ended up in the National Sport England learning piece, which is a project that Ian worked on with a team at Voiceability. So just to summarise, we've reached over 10,000 people through Tackling Inequalities. You've reached over 10,000 people. We've funded 58 projects across Lincolnshire with £240,000 worth of investment. And we very much see those partnerships as being things that we want to continue to build on, and not just being a short-term intervention whilst we were kind of supporting people through COVID. So moving on in terms of where are we at with the whole system approach, and I really wanted to kind of start off, I think, by bringing this back to basics and understanding actually what does it mean to be a more physically active nation. I've always loved the quote, if exercise could be purchased in the pill, it would be the single most widely prescribed beneficial medicine in the nation, and wouldn't it just? If we could get more people moving, there would absolutely be less reliance on pills and medication in the health and wellbeing sector. But the positive impacts of an active population reaches communities, of course. It makes stronger, safer, more cohesive places for us to live. It reaches, of course, health and wellbeing, supporting the reduction in those health inequalities, reducing demand and pressures that we know the health and care system face. Reduce cases of dementia, diseases, etc., etc. You know, the kind of stats go on. And importantly, I think on the economy as well, we know that our LEP have, you know, a really big vision around the economic prosperity and growth within the greater Lincolnshire economy. Well, actually, we also know that employees who are physically active take 27% fewer sick days. And we know that people are more productive if they are looking after their well-being and given permission to look after their well-being in their workplace. There are so many large organisations in Lincolnshire who can actually support their workforce to think about being more active, whether that's cycling to work, taking some time off in their lunch break to move more. So that the positive benefits of physical activity, I think, are obvious and apparent to literally every single corner of our county and every sector that we're working in. Who influences the system then? At the centre of this slide, I've put a heart, because actually we all have to be committed, don't we, to walk out the door. Nobody's really going to take us. We've got to have that self-motivation, and we've got to be committed as individuals. But the environment that we live in can really help that motivation. It can help people think differently about how they behave. We've touched on access to green and blue spaces. I think one of Lincolnshire's most significant untapped assets is our amazing blue and green spaces. And we were chatting over dinner last night, and I know it's easy to come up with these ideas, but you know, why haven't we got beaches full of people doing Tai Chi at 7 o'clock in the morning? Why aren't the volleyball nets coming out at 6 o'clock at night? Why aren't we able to jump into the amazing open water assets that we have available? And actually, it's really difficult to know where you can swim outside. The network of footpaths, the network of cycle routes. You know, we have a county that I think is shouting out for people just to be outside. So how can we make more of the wonderful blue and green assets that we have to enable people to just move more? How can we make it normal? Unless we change cultural norms, unless we change attitudes, are we really going to start seeing people doing Tai Chi on the beach? No, because do you know what? If you're the only one that's going to be doing it, you probably won't bother and you'll stay in your bedroom, or you might not bother at all. Actually, how can we change those cultural norms? And I think we can learn a huge amount from the work that Sport England have done to understand what it means to see people like me in the advertising, to see people like me doing things. And we talk a lot with some of our agencies about who's the messenger. And actually, do you know what? We are not the best messenger. The best messenger is that person who might have been inactive, that has had that brilliant story, that has got a really good case study to share. If you look at the This Girl Can campaign, you know, it's normal women doing normal things as part of their normal everyday life. And we really need to think carefully about who those ambassadors are, who those cultural champions are that are really going to help inspire change. Because ultimately we'll recognise that we're not always the best people to be delivering that message. Organisations have got a key role to play. I've talked about workplaces, of sport, of course, you know, our schools, our employers, our hospitals, our healthcare system partners, and organisations can all play a role in terms of helping us be more active. And policy and strategy absolutely comes back to the fantastic presentation that we had from Ian Fytche. Leaders of district councils, policymakers, people in planning, people in highways are actually all impacting on our ability to be active on a day-to-day basis. If all of our new housing developments had cycleways where it was safe and easy to get on your bike or your scooter or your skateboard and to walk through the network of you know, houses and to be able to connect to the shops really easily rather than having a dual carriageway you know, barrier between you and the local services, all of those people can really help influence our ability to be active. And this, I think, is why we need a 10-year vision around Let's Move Lincolnshire. Yes, we can continue and we will continue to deliver short-term interventions and to create short-term change, but actually to create a lifelong change in the way that we think about physical activity and to meet the needs that Ian painted the picture of earlier in the day, we really need to be genuinely thinking about this on a system-wide basis, because perhaps if we continue to make the decisions that we've always made, we're not going to see the change that we really want to see, and we're making it really difficult for the individual that's at the heart of all this to change their behaviours. In terms of Let's Move Lincolnshire, I think a lot of you that are familiar with the work of Active Lincolnshire and wider partners will be very familiar with Let's Move Lincolnshire. It launched in 2018 after significant stakeholder consultation. And the simplest way that I kind of describe Let's Move Lincolnshire as being the county-wide blueprint for a more active county. Again, it comes back to recognising that no one single organisation can solve this challenge that we face. But actually, if we come together under Let's Move Lincolnshire, we can see where we can all play a role. So the blueprint looked like this back in 2018. We've had, of course, the pandemic since then, and we now have the new Uniting the Movement strategy. So we're working on how we can enhance and develop this really strong concept and this really strong foundation to make sure that Let's Move Lincolnshire is fit for the future. And this is our vehicle for us all collectively to get behind, to make that difference that Ian was asking the question, you know, can we really crack this? In terms of where we're at now, I mentioned the blueprint was launched in 2018. Between then and 2021, a huge amount of activity happened, lots of groups and conversations going on, not least the One Network, one of the most active parts of Let's Move Lincolnshire, in fact, looking at the well-being of children and young people. I've mentioned those catalysts there, and we're now at a point with the Let's Move executive where we're refreshing and revisiting Let's Move Lincolnshire. And this is really the introduction of that conversation. This is the first time that we're coming out speaking to stakeholders to say, this is what we intend to do. We want Let's Move Lincolnshire to be the physical activity strategy for the whole county. It already has the endorsement of being the physical activity strand of the Lincolnshire Health and Wellbeing Board. And we are keen now to see Let's Move Lincolnshire really come into its own and to really start collaborating and co-creating opportunities under the umbrella of Let's Move Lincolnshire. So we're working on the refresh of this strategy between now and the end of March. We'll be coming out to you to ask you further questions and having conversations. If you're interested, please let me know. You know, I'd welcome you approaching us around that part of the process. We anticipate the strategy outlining some short-term outcomes and some short-term actions, and importantly, that 10-year vision. How are we really going to create this systemic change so that by the time we review where we are in 2031, and believe me, we won't leave it 10 years before we review, but in 10 years' time, you know, perhaps we're all back together looking at actually what a difference Let's Move Lincolnshire has made. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm not going to dwell on this slide. I was just kind of showcasing how all of these different aspects fit together. And I think I wanted to touch on the shared vision. This absolutely mirrors, I think, some of the work that Mike has talked about in Sport England around how do we do this? We've got to listen, we've got to learn, and we've got to understand. It's not about us coming up with a solution. We absolutely need to focus on inequalities in those groups who do face more barriers to being accessing opportunities to be active. We want to do things with people, of course, and not to them, and we want to collaborate and co-create on this journey. We really want to innovate. You know, I think there are some significant opportunities for us to just think a little bit differently, and as important as our formal leisure centres and activity provision is, actually we can be really creative in terms of how we think about this agenda. So we really want to just understand how we can bring about transformational change, and I think a shared vision is the way that we're going to do that here in Lincolnshire. I wanted to touch on one of the things that you're going to be seeing going live in the very near future. It won't look like this, but just a flavour of some of the work that we're doing under the Let's Move Lincolnshire brand to begin to take to the residents of Lincolnshire opportunities to be active. There's a significant communications role here to be done, and we can all understand system change, but again, what does it really mean to those people in Lincolnshire? So the club and activity finder and wider website will be the kind of go-to signposting tool for people to find out how they can be active in the county. We don't intend to duplicate anything that's out there already. Through open data technology, we're going to be scooping up those sessions that are already available by open data and encouraging people who are not working with open data to do that. But we want the Zumba classes in Skegness, we want the health walks in Boston, you know, we want the cycle trails in South Holland to be on this platform, and then we'll push people out to the websites that host the really good quality information if people are interested in taking that further. The other fantastic thing about this platform is that we won't be expecting everybody to come to it. through APIs and various other widgets, we'll be sharing the content back out with our partners. So if you're in the healthcare profession, if you're a university, you're a college, you're a district authority, you can have your own tailored version of this content, and all the work will be done for you. You can just publish this on your website and people will be able to search for sessions and activities within your particular patch or your particular area of work via your own website. And I think this is an important starting point. When we go live at the end of October, that's exactly what it will be, something for us to build on over the coming months. And we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes with Jo, who's in the room today, around actually what do the people of Lincolnshire want to see on this website? So just to reassure you, we're not making the decisions, we're asking the people of Lincolnshire. We've had some really headline feedback already, and I hope Jo doesn't mind me sharing this, but we know that the people of Lincolnshire have told us they're proud of Lincolnshire. They want to see this relevant to Lincolnshire. That means colours. They've talked about seeing the Lincolnshire flag. They've talked about images with things that are obviously Lincolnshire. This is a really proud county of yellowbellies and people that are proud of where they come from. And we want that to shine. We want that sense of local place to really shine through this website. They've also told us that activities that show that they can be inclusive and accessible are really important as well. So that was actually really satisfying to hear, that people want to know that, yeah, it's okay to do that on your own, but it's also it's okay to do that in a group. And again, it comes back to that. There's people like me in the images doing these activities. Therefore, I feel like I've got the confidence to go and give that a try myself. So some really great work going on with Let's Move Lincolnshire. If you are interested in getting involved, come and have the conversation, but you'll start to see a lot more communications come out around this platform in the coming weeks as we get closer to the launch date. So I'm going to stop talking I've put this slide up around making it happen, but actually just wanted to have a few minutes for an opportunity for us to take a pause and for you to share any reflections or any questions that you might have with anybody that you've heard from today. Mike and Scott are there ready to take your questions. We'll then have a short comfort break and then we'll come back and start to answer a couple of questions and have roundtable discussions.